everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. My name is Denise Jorgens. I'm the Director of International House here at the University of Chicago. The mission of International House and International Houses worldwide, which is currently a network of 19 houses on 4 continents, is to enable students and scholars from around the world to live and learn together in a diverse community that builds lifelong qualities of leadership, respect, and friendship. Here at International House of Chicago, this mission is achieved by daily interaction among our students and scholars, both through our residential population and our graduate programming through our Graduate Commons program, and through our broader student life activities and internationally focused public programs, such as this evening's event, which are designed to foster diversity of thought and experience. Tonight's event is one of over 200 internationally focused public programs held at International House of Chicago. Whether it's a music or dance performance, a film festival, a cultural or national celebration, lecture, conference, or symposium, International House presents programs that advance cross-cultural understanding and promote civic discourse on community, national, and world affairs. These programs would not be possible without the support and participation of organizations across the campus and around the world. For tonight's program, we are grateful to the University of Chicago's Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture for allowing us to partner with them on this program. On behalf of the University of Chicago and the global International House community, I want to welcome you again and thank you for coming this evening. I hope to see you again throughout the remainder of the spring quarter as we continue with many of our Global Voices programs. Information about upcoming programs is available on our literature table, and you are welcome and invited to sign up to receive our weekly e-bulletin. And now, before I introduce our next speaker, I want to just remind everybody that the copies of the book, Jose Antonio Vargas's book, is available for sale in the foyer by another of our partners, the Seminary Co-op Bookstore. And Jose Vargas has graciously agreed to sign copies of his book following the program, so that will be in the foyer. And now I'd like to introduce Professor Salikoko Mufwene to begin our program. He is a native of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He is the Frank J. McLaurin Distinguished Service Professor of Linguistics and the College here at the University of Chicago, where he also serves as professor on the Committee on Evolutionary Biology, on the Committee of Science, and on the Committee on African Studies. He is also the interim faculty director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. Thank you again for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Denise, for this excellent opening of the evening. And I come here in my capacity as interim director of this, interim faculty director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. And I'm quite happy that we can continue with the tradition of hosting an annual public lecture. And very grateful that for this year, we were able to get Jose Antonio Vargas to come as our speaker. I had a brief conversation with him while bringing him here to iHouse, and I can guarantee that there is a lot to learn from him about immigration, and the title as Master Narrative seems quite fitting. But before we get there, and because Jose will be introduced more competently by Diana Kalima, let me just seize this opportunity to acknowledge a few people and organizations without whose work and without whose collaboration this event wouldn't be possible. I'll start by recognizing the executive director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, who does most of the work, who actually should be here, welcoming all of you. And there's Tracy Matthews. She's there if you can stand. You know. And she's been working on this event day and night, exchanging emails with different people, sometimes at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. So you can tell to what extent she's been invested in the success of the event. But also I would like to thank Denise Jorgens again. Although she said, you know, that she's associated with us, and that is very true, but we are grateful to have had access to International House. We've come here several times, and you know, it remains our first choice for these kinds of events. Okay, and we want to acknowledge on this occasion International House Global Voices series, acknowledge her as the International House Global Voices series executive director. We would also like to acknowledge the support that we have received from Ireri Rivas, director of the Center for Community Inclusion and Identity. We would like to also acknowledge the Pan-Asia Solidarity Coalition, a U-Chicago Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and the Seminary Co-op bookstores who are there selling copies of Jose's book. And then many thanks should go to the work that the programming committee of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture has invested in coming to the selection of Jose Antonio Vargas as our speaker. And the committee includes Alison Nadia Field, who unfortunately cannot be here, Eve Hewing, who is here. If you can stand, people can see you. And then Adam Getachew, who is traveling and cannot be here. And I would also like to acknowledge the other members of CSRPC's, what an abbreviation, CSRPC's staff and volunteers, including, in addition to Tracy Matthews, Marilyn Willis, who is here, Kate Liu, who is also here, Julius Jones, and Camille Morgan, who worked at the center until about 2 weeks ago and found a better job. Not that she didn't like this job, she just found another job that she found more satisfying. And last but not least, I would like to thank the CAM TV for videotaping the event for future broadcast. And Also, in that same vein, I would like to thank the Office of the Provost, which has supported the center all along. And so, having said all this, I would like to introduce Diana Kalima, who is going to introduce Jose. She was born in Zambia and grew up in Metro Atlanta. She is a second-year student in the college at the University of Chicago, studying music and comparative race and ethnic studies. Her extracurricular activities include being the president of the University of Chicago Coalition for Immigrant Rights, the program director of the radio station WHPK, and singing in the university's women's ensemble. She is also a member of the Undocu Black Network and Black Youth Project 100. When she's not organizing, Diana can be found producing music, writing songs, and spoken word poetry, or being a nap enthusiast. I don't suppose you are going to nap here tonight. And with that, I can invite you here, please, to introduce us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Professor Sally Coco. I wrote a poem after reading Jose's book that I'd like to share with you all before I introduce him, and it's entitled Dear Jose Antonio Vargas. What do you do when you cannot travel back to that country or home or land? Separation separates you from your ability to cry or ache for the memories that simply are not there. What do you do when you're told to leave your emotions at the border? You place your mask ever so gently, appropriating the actions you see on your own TV that vilifies you, passing as an American to earn your citizenship box, to follow the master narrative. But that ever so gentle placement comes with a violence of drowning immigrant with your tears, an American, the makeshift lifesaver that buoys you out of the multiplicity of your identities. You're seeking this external validation your immigrant status won't grant you. As if immigrant is a covering that you can scrub off, as if your status is a record that can be expunged if you hold yourself to the standard of good example. If only you push more, do more, be more, in a system that was never created to see us, never created to validate us, never created to be our totality. As if a document only serves to complement the complement of good example, as if a document can append or amend a system that made us pretend that the exception was the rule. When our existence is politicized, we bloom rebelliously, bloom resiliently, and bloom relentlessly. What do you do when your dreams to bloom become dreams deferred? What do you do when you aren't lucky enough to have the lawyers holding a flame to melt ice? You live in that liminal space, subject to the ignorance that created your imprisonment, waiting for the ice that detains your humanity to thaw, praying that a change of status is like a change of state, thinking of metaphors because it provides for some semblance of control, 3 letters to unite us into one. In the home away from home, grateful for the opportunities, but remembering you deserve better, deserving the chance to dream as hard as you work, not working to twist your tongue to unfamiliar jargon. Your love language is simply being left alone. And when you choose to talk, uplifting the margins of the margins and having the collective strength to stop hiding and start flourishing. We do it with each other because we can't do it alone. Organizing communities and building power, making a way out of no way to ensure our safety, humanity, and dignity. Making a home in a country founded on the freedom of movement, we each have a story. People throw labels on you, but you choose what sticks. So I ask you to define American, but remember, American doesn't define me. Thank you. And with that, Jose Antonio Vargas is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Emmy-nominated filmmaker, and theatrical producer. A leading voice for the human rights of immigrants, he founded the nonprofit media and cultural organization of Define American, named one of the world's most innovative companies by Fast Company. His best-selling memoir, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, was published by HarperCollins in 2018. Most recently, he co-produced Heidi Schreck's acclaimed play, What the Constitution Means to Me, which opened on Broadway this spring. In 2011, the New York Times Magazine published a groundbreaking essay he wrote in which he revealed and chronicled his life in America as an undocumented immigrant. A year later, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine worldwide with fellow undocumented immigrants as part of a follow-up to the cover story he wrote. He then produced and directed Documented, an autobiographical documentary feature film that aired on CNN and received a 2015 NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Documentary. Also in 2015, MTV aired White People, an Emmy-nominated television special he produced and directed on what it means to be young and white in a demographically changing America. Among accolades he has received are the Freedom to Write Award from Penn Center USA and honorary degrees from Colby College and the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Passionate about the role of arts in society and promoting equity in education, he serves on the advisory board of the Dream.US Scholarship Fund for undocumented immigrant students. A product of the San Francisco Bay Area, he is a proud graduate of San Francisco State University, class of '04, where he was named Alumnus of the Year in 2012. He also attended Mountain View High School, class of 2000. An elementary school will be named after Vargas and will open in his hometown of Mountain View, California this fall. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Jose Antonio Vargas.
Can I have a copy of that? Thank you. Now I feel bad. She should give my speech. Like, that poem was amazing. Thank you for having me here. I was just reminded, actually, about a month ago, coming here. Since coming out as undocumented in 2011, I've done about 1,400 events in 49 states. I go to as many Tea Party meetings I get invited in, and try to engage with as many Republicans and conservatives that want me in their space. But I forgot that one of the earlier events that I did when I didn't know how to speak publicly, and maybe I still don't, was actually right in this very school, at this very venue, in May 2012. That was like 7 years and a lifetime ago. What makes this return to me meaningful is I think I'm a better speaker now, hopefully, than 7 years ago. But that this event was hosted and is hosted by the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. I'm saying this because we cannot talk about how we define American, which has been the work of my professional and personal life, the work that I have risked, my professional and personal career, my personal life and my professional career, and the work that for me is probably going to be going on till whenever. We cannot talk about this question of defining American without understanding the racial, political, and cultural context in which the conversation exists. So the first time I was here 7 years ago, I talked about this. Isn't that the most horrible photo you've ever seen? So before publishing this essay 8 years ago, around this time, almost 8 years ago, I spoke to about 20 lawyers, 20 immigration lawyers. All but one said, you cannot do this. They told me that telling the truth, all of it, in this long 4,000-word article, will jeopardize my safety. They didn't know if I would get arrested or detained. And telling the truth, some of the lawyers said, will really limit your future. I remember a lawyer from Stanford University said to me, the moment you do this, the moment you come out, no one can employ you. Although we know that, people employ undocumented immigrants, right? They can't knowingly employ an undocumented immigrant, especially someone who did it in the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine. But the more they said don't do it, the more it felt like I had to do it. And in the story, I just kind of jotted down the facts. I was born in the Philippines. When I woke up one day, my suitcase was packed. My mom said I was going to America. I didn't really know that was going to happen. And frankly, when I landed at the Los Angeles International Airport, I thought I was in the wrong country because I thought America was Baywatch, Oprah, Michael Jackson, and Whitney Houston. And then I got to the airport and Oprah wasn't there and Baywatch wasn't there. Then 4 years after arriving here at the age of 16, I went to the DMV like any 16-year-old. And the woman at the DMV, when she looked at my green card so that I can get a license, she said, "This is fake. Don't come back here again." And when she said that, the first thing that came to my mind was that I'm not Mexican. Because even back then, in the spring of 1997, before there's Google, right, before Trump, right, this issue was already married to Mexican people. So I thought, wait, maybe because she thought my name was Jose Antonio Vargas, she thought I was Mexican, and I said to her, and she said, "It doesn't matter what you are, this green card is fake, don't come back here again." I got home, confronted my grandparents, to whom my mother sent me to live with, both of whom are naturalized US citizens, so I didn't think anything was wrong. My grandfather said, "Yeah, the paper's fake, don't show it to anybody else, you're not supposed to be here." And then he said his plan in his mind was simple. I would work at the flea market as a janitor, and then I would find a woman to marry who's a US citizen, and poof, I'd become an American. I then told him that I was gay, so that complicated the plan. 7 months after this, my English teacher, Mrs. Dewar, said I asked too many annoying questions, and I should do this thing called journalism. I had no idea what that was. I come from a family of construction workers, food servers, security guards. You know, no one wrote. We certainly didn't have books at home. But I found out that when you write a newspaper article, you get a byline, so your name would be in the article, by Jose Antonio Vargas. So my 16-year-old naive self thought to myself, if I can't be here because I don't have the right papers, what if my name was on the paper? As a 16-year-old, I thought I could actually write my way into America. So that was my plan, right? June 2011. In 2011, President Obama, who knows me because I used to be a political reporter for the Washington Post, and I've interviewed him, and that year in 2011, he had deported 400,000 immigrants. And for some reason, here I am in the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine. I go on Bill O'Reilly's show, I did Stephen Colbert's show, I did everything I possibly could to raise my hand and say, "I'm here, what do you want to do?" I didn't hear from anybody. No one contacted me from the government. To the point where I actually called ICE myself. I wrote that in the book, saying, "Hi, I have not heard from you. Are you gonna deport me? Why not?" And the woman at ICE, the local ICE office, said, "What are you doing calling us?" I said, "Well, I want to find out what's going on." And then she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said to her, "I'm writing a story, a follow-up cover story about what happened." And she said, "We have no comment." It seems that for everybody, for the people on the left, people on the right, for the government, for the governmental agencies, I did not fit the narrative. Actually, I remember when I was in Chicago, the first time after I came out, after this was published, before I spoke at this university, I was attending an immigration rally because, as you may know, Chicago is a hotbed, a proud hotbed of immigrant activists that have been really doing the work and organizing people, especially undocumented young people. And I was at this rally, and this man said to me, "You can't represent us. You're too successful. You're not even Mexican." And then some immigrant activist said to me, "What are you doing? Shouldn't you be protesting? Shouldn't you be tying yourself up to the fence? Like, why can't you be a better activist?" And all I can think of was that I don't consider myself an activist or an advocate. That's not what I do. I write, I make films, I tell stories. To me, writing, filmmaking, storytelling, that's my activism. Insisting on facts, providing context, complicating the narrative. And as I've traveled across the country now in the past 8 years, I get asked so many different questions. Questions like, why haven't you gotten deported? I really don't know. You have to ask the government. I would argue that I'm actually not hiding from the government. I think the government is hiding from me. they would ask me questions like, why don't you just get legal? That's my favorite question. I get asked that question from journalists whose job it is to inform the public, but guess what? The journalists themselves don't know that there is no process for 11 million people to actually adjust their status and quote unquote become legal. But to me, what's interesting is, as much as I get asked all of these questions all across the country, including, oh, you're not Mexican? Because, you know, for some reason, people don't know that the fastest growing undocumented population are actually coming from Asia, China, India. 1 out of 7 Koreans is here illegally. For some reason, we don't talk about undocumented black immigrants, who, by the way, face higher detention and deportation rates because of systematic racism that's built into our enforcement structure. We don't talk about undocumented white people. I meet them a lot at Starbucks. They say hi. And then I tell them, hey, can you go to Define American and share your story? You know, about how you came here illegally from Canada and overstayed your visa, or from France, or from the UK, or from Germany. And for the most part, they decline because it's okay to just pass, right? So I get asked all these questions, but what I never get asked is, what does this feel like, this illegal thing, especially now? And to be honest, I think the 3 most dangerous words in the English language are I, me, and my. So writing about myself is always like a struggle. I would rather report things out and give you policies and statistics and get lost in all of that than talk about what I feel. But if I was gonna do this book, I had to do it. By the way, the cover is yellow because, you know, I'm Asian. For better or worse, I thought, why not signal that out? That's my handwriting. That is not my fingerprint. That's a step too far for my 17 lawyers. You're probably wondering why Jose Antonio Vargas doesn't have an accent on the E. After I turned in the manuscript, the copy editor at HarperCollins, my publisher, said, hey, Jose, we should put an accent on the E. And I said, nope, Filipinos don't put accent on our E's. And she was like, well, why not? And I said, well, it's our way of rebelling against Spanish colonialism. She goes, that's not a response. I love copy editors. She goes, find a better reason. And so I contacted a linguist anthropologist at Stanford University, Anthony Rosa, who then told me that my name is because of Spanish colonialism. But after the Americans took over, after the Spanish-American War, when they got to the Philippines, the Americans' typewriters that they brought didn't have any accent marks. So my name is actually a combination of Spanish colonialism and American imperialism. And in writing this book, I didn't want to do a traditional memoir, because, you know, I'm only 38. Hopefully there's more life to live. What I wanted to do was just to kind of capture the essence of feeling. So my editor said, why don't you write the 20 most painful experiences of your life? Which I highly recommend, by the way. And then when I wrote them all down, I came up with 22. Everything in the list was about lying, passing, or hiding. You lie a lot. The little things you lie about, right? Like, how'd you get here? Where'd you come from? You lie to the big things. Like, I started telling people my mom was dead because it was easier to just say that than have to admit that she's alive, because then I can't really explain why she can't come here and I can't go there. And you lie to get jobs. You commit fraud, because it's either I work at the flea market as a janitor under the table, or I commit fraud and write for the Washington Post, right? You learn how to pass. The biggest passing thing for me was, when I found that I was here illegally, was to get rid of my thick Tagalog accent, because I thought in this country, if you have an accent that's not a European-sounding accent, they think you're a foreigner. It's not cute. So thankfully back then, there was this thing called PBS, so I watched everything Bill Moyers was in. And then thankfully, Dr. Dre and hip hop and R&B was really hot in the 90s. So I thought if I could do Dr. Dre and Bill Moyers, I can pass. And then you hide a lot. You hide so much from the government, even in plain sight, that I think you end up hiding from yourself. And in the process of writing this book, Toni Morrison was probably the best and the biggest influence. When I was writing the book, you know, when you write a book, structure is probably the most important thing. And I had to figure out, how do I explain in the book these different kind of systems that I've had to operate in. And then I remembered reading The Bluest Eye in 8th grade. Anybody here, can you raise your hand if you read The Bluest Eye? Okay, great. That wasn't the case in Lawrence, Kansas a few weeks ago. The Bluest Eye to me was like a puzzle The way the book began, evoking the Dick and Jane and mother and father photograph from basic reading primers I knew nothing about. The way the book was structured, it was divided into 4 parts, each a season of the year. The way Morrison revealed the entire plot of the book on the very first page. Pecola Breedlove, the 11-year-old at the center of the story, is impregnated by her own father, and she will live and her child will die. The way Morrison used language, including the italics that opened the narrative, she wrote, "There is nothing more to say except why. But since why is difficult to handle, one must take refuge in how." The how of the story is this young girl believing that she's ugly, unattractive, unwanted. She took it all in, so much so that she wishes and she wants blue eyes. The why of the story really kind of haunted me. So why was Pecola wishing for blue eyes when she had black ones? Who told her to want blue eyes? Why did she believe them? And to me, you would think that this story would have nothing to do with someone like me, but I actually found kind of a central thing we had in common. We were both lied to. Hers was the lie that blue eyes were better, that she was not enough. I didn't recognize the lies that made up my life until a year after I read that book, right? The word illegal was kind of ubiquitous, always floating in the air. Illegal was what the news media called us, right? And I learned that this word wasn't mere identification. It actually carried meaning, signifying what I could not do. So back then, and in many parts of the country still now, being quote unquote illegal meant I can't drive, right? Being illegal meant I can't go to college. Being illegal translated to limitations of what my life was and what it could be. I was so obsessed by this book that I actually went to the public libraries and looked at the microfiche. Do you know what a microfiche is? The young people don't. It's like Google before there was Google. So you go look at articles. And I was so obsessed that I wanted to understand, why did Toni Morrison wrote this book? So then I found an interview between Bill Moyers and Toni Morrison. I transcribed it in the book. I'll read it to you now. So this is them on the TV show. This is Bill Moyers saying, "I don't think I've ever met a more pathetic creature in contemporary literature than Pecola Breedlove. Abused by her," then Morrison says, "everybody." Then Bill Moyers chimed in, "Parents, rejected by her neighbors, ugly, homely, alone, finally descending into madness. It's been years," Moyers said, "since I read that novel, but I remember her." Then Morrison goes, "She surrendered completely to the so-called master narrative." Moyers, "What?" Morrison goes, "The master narrative. I mean, the whole notion of what is ugliness, what is worthlessness, what is contempt. She got it from her family, she got it from school, she got it from the movie, she got it everywhere." Then Moyers goes, "The master narrative, what is that? Is that life?" Then Morrison goes, "No. It's white male life. The master narrative is whatever ideological script that is being imposed by the people in authority on everybody else. The master fiction, history, it has a certain point of view. So when these little girls see that the most prized gift that they can get at Christmas time is this little white doll, that's the master narrative speaking, this is beautiful, this is lovely, and you're not it. She's so needful, so completely needful, has so little, needs so much. She becomes the perfect victim." I remember reading that when I was 16, and I remember thinking, I cannot be a victim. I cannot be this illegal faggot that people think I'm supposed to be. I don't know if Toni Morrison knows this. I haven't met her yet, although I think someone is actually trying to figure out how to do that. Man, I can't wait to tell her that somehow she freed this undocumented gay Filipino kid. She was like my passport. She allowed me to make sure that I claimed myself and that didn't surrender, and how other people claimed what I was. So our work at Define American, in many ways, has been and can be defined by trying to rewrite what the master narrative of immigration is. The biggest work that we do actually right now at Define American is, if you see a television show and you see an immigrant character, an undocumented character on Grey's Anatomy, on Roswell, on Superstore, on Blind Spot, on Spike Lee, She's Gotta Have It. A lot of it is because actually our team at Define American talks and consults with writers, producers, and directors to better integrate more accurate, more humane immigrant storylines. So far, we've done about 55 of these television shows, right? So much so that Fast Company, the magazine, actually selected it as one of the top innovative companies in the film and TV department. What has been more challenging for us, ironically, because I'm a journalist, is news media. How do we change the master narrative of news coverage? When I knew that I was coming here, I was really trying to figure out what do I write for this event? And then, like some sort of a signal, this came. I don't know if you can see that. That's the cover of the Atlantic magazine, the cover of, I think this was the April cover. And this is an 8,000-word story, cover story, that, by the way, is published in the magazine called The Atlantic, that prides itself on having Abraham Lincoln as one of its early subscribers, right? And I don't know if you can see the headline, How Much Immigration is Too Much? It's written by a guy named David Frum, who's actually an immigrant from Canada and a naturalized US citizen. And he's a partisan pundit. He was a speechwriter for George Bush, for President Bush, who supported the Iraq War. In recent years now, since the Trump era, he's become one of the leading anti-Trump conservatives. And you know we like that. We like in Republicans who oppose Trump, like we think that's like a cool thing to think, which is great. And I know him because I started reading him in the mid-90s because I was really confused by what a Democrat and a Republican was. I couldn't really understand left and right, liberal, conservative. I didn't know. And he had a book called What's Right? The New Conservative Majority and the Remaking of America. So I know his work. So I started reading this cover story really anxious. And then the first paragraph, which I will read to you, hit. Through much of the 20th century, Frum writes, the United States received comparatively fewer immigrants. In the 60 years from 1915 until 1975, nearly a human lifetime, he points out, the United States admitted fewer immigrants than arrived, legally and illegally, in the single decade of the 1990s. That's the first paragraph of the 8,000 word. As someone who's written long stories, I kept waiting in the next 7,500 words for him to explain that the very reason why this country received fewer immigrants between 1915 and 1975 is because of this thing called the Immigration Nationality Act of 1924. I'm sorry, the Immigration Act of 1924 that effectively banned immigration from Asia and set a total immigration quota of 165,000 for countries outside of the Western Hemisphere. The country received fewer immigrants because we were actually letting fewer immigrants, and no immigrants at all, coming from Italy, Greece, Poland, and other Slavic countries. That's why there were fewer immigrants. According to the US Department of State Office of the Historian, the purpose of this anti-immigrant act was to preserve the ideal of US homogeny. That never came in the article. What he did, though, in the article was make arguments that hate groups have been making for years, if not decades. They got so excited, the hate groups, that they even tweeted out an article. The guy, Peter Brimlow, he's a self-described white nationalist writer from the website Videre. And when this cover story came out, he tweeted that this is the kind of story that they've been telling for years, but never got the platform that The Atlantic got, right? This was the print cover. The online cover, because you know, they like clickbait. If liberals won't enforce borders, fascists will. That was confusing to me because I think, as I understand immigration history, liberals have also been detaining and deporting immigrants since we created the detention system, especially during the Clinton and Bush years. So which liberals is Frum actually talking about? I have to tell you that this article was so, for me, triggering, such is the word, that we actually ended up saying at Define American, if the news media does not report the facts and provide context, then fascists will. The fact is, and I'm sorry to say this as a journalist, most of the mainstream media, not only national outlets like The Atlantic, but actually also local organizations like Chicago Tribune, they get so much wrong about this issue and so many facts that they just kind of ignore. Like the fact, for example, that undocumented immigrants pay billions of dollars in taxes. Last month was tax season. I wrote a book, I made a film, so I made money. I wrote a check so big, I think I should be a Republican, right? And I wrote the check to the Department of the Treasury, which, by the way, cashed the check like 5 days later. I find it so interesting that the IRS take billions of dollars from undocumented workers, and they take the billions of dollars from us to what? Help detain and deport us? By the way, do you know this figure? Is this the kind of statistic that you hear on the liberal, progressive, quote unquote, NPR, or the New York Times, or the Washington Post? Certainly not on Fox News. Certainly Rush Limbaugh doesn't want to talk about this, right? Why don't we talk about the fact that in this country, you can't separate undocumented people from documented people, right? I'm Filipino, a lot of Filipinos in Chicago, as you know, by just going to O'Hare Airport. So we're like the Italians of Asia. We have huge ass families. So in California alone, there's 34 relatives that I have. Of the 34 relatives, everybody's either a US citizen, because they're born here, naturalized, or a green card holder. So I'm actually the only one of 34 in California who's undocumented. So you can't separate the families from each other. But to me, context is really, really important here. Now, I actually made this slide specifically for you. Check this out. Between 1776 and 1966, that's kind of the Ellis Island era, the era before ICE, right? Mostly the era before Border Patrol, which was created in the early 1900s. 42 million immigrants moved to America, mostly from Europe. 42 million. I like to go on Bill O'Reilly's show because that's how Republicans invite me. You know, when he used to have a show. And Bill O'Reilly, I remember one time on TV, he said to me, my great-great-grandfather who came from Ireland did it the right way. And I said to him, wait, what right way? Didn't the Irish just show up? They didn't have a visa process. There was no green cards. They showed up. There was a potato famine. So 42 million, but guess what? Between 1966 and 2016, the same era that my own family got here, we added 45 million people. You know what the main difference is? Most of them did not come from Europe. The majority of them come from Latin America, from Asia, from the Caribbean, and from Africa, and from the Middle East. That is the very, very distinct difference. And I have to say, you know, in this country, we like to talk about immigration, who gets to come to America and who gets to become, we cannot talk about immigration, who gets to come to America and who gets to become American without discussing race, especially in a country where the qualifications of US citizenship depended on race. The first time we established who could be a US citizen was in 1790, and the only people who could be US citizens were free white people of good moral character. In this country, we cannot talk about immigration without discussing race, because in this country, especially in this country, African Americans who were not immigrants had to migrate north to escape violence, widespread lynching wrought by racist, segregationist, and legal policies. They also fled in search of economic opportunities. A recent obsession of mine, by the way, has been studying the Great Migration, what some people call the Great Northward Migration, or the Great Black Migration, the movement of 6 million African Americans out of the South to the North, right? By the thousands. Here in Chicago, apparently, many, many people who came here from the South came from the state of Mississippi. We cannot talk about immigration, who gets to come to America, who gets to become American, without acknowledging the fact that the Irish, the Polish, the Germans, the Greeks, the Italians, wait, isn't this where they filmed my big fat Greek wedding? Yes. All of those groups were actually once considered ethnic. We recently found this really interesting statistic. I made this film called White People for MTV a few years ago. I don't know if you've seen it, it's on YouTube. But when we were filming, we found this family in Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst. And I like them because they're an Italian family in a community that has now become much more Asian. And I spent about a week with them filming, and Angelo, the dad, I'll never forget, he said, well, I don't understand why these Chinese people, we say hi to them, you know, we try to be good neighbors, but they can't talk to us and they don't want to talk to us. Why can't they just speak English, Angelo said. And then I found out, hey, Angelo, how long did your dad take to speak English? Oh, it took him a while. So why is it okay for your dad who come from Italy to take a while to learn English, and yet the Chinese, it's taken them, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years? Why is that a while? So what is this about? Far too often, the data and information we get about immigrants, documented and undocumented, come from sources with their own political and politically and culturally racist agendas. So this is from a group called Numbers USA. I don't know if you can see this ad. It says the government should stop protecting criminal illegal aliens in sanctuary cities. So this got about 18,000 likes. Numbers USA spends millions of dollars in advertising, putting this kind of content in the news feeds of millions of Americans. At Define American, we have a Sources Matter campaign that actually calls on journalists that when a group like Numbers USA does this, right, how do you describe them? You describe them by acknowledging that Numbers USA actually belong in this anti-immigrant machine. These to me are the holy trifecta of anti-immigrant groups in DC. And the one thing that they share is that they were founded by a man named John Tanton. They have millions of dollars, by the way, that they've been spending on having studies, right, to say that we are more inferior, having studies that say that we mooch off society, having studies that say, wait a second, America's too full. The same arguments that David Frum was making in his story. This is just one quote from the founder of the organization. Can the minorities who are going to inherit California run an advanced society? I know the term minorities to me too is kind of off, because you know, in the state of California where I'm from, the minorities actually make up the majority, right? Now, mind you, this is what he thinks. In the cover story that Frum wrote, he actually said, the Immigration Skeptical Center for Immigration Studies estimates that it costs 12 times more to resettle a refugee in the United States than to house, feed, and provide work for that refugee in his or her safest neighboring country. Now, I don't know if you're going to trust the Center for Immigration Studies for that. Is it any surprise that one of the leaders of that organization says this? That Haiti's so screwed up because it wasn't colonized long enough? Now, when organizations like The Atlantic or the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune, when they use the Center for Immigration Studies as sources, do they name them? Do they say that they have white nationalist agendas? Do they say that the Southern Poverty Law Center actually describes them as hate groups? Unfortunately, they don't. At Define American, we actually did a study that before Trump was elected, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, USA Today cited those hate groups 16 times. And since in 2018, the first half alone, last year, they were cited 102 times. So this is reportage, right? Now, not everybody reads the New York Times, not everybody reads USA Today, not everybody reads The Atlantic, but they do set the agenda. They do set what we call the master narrative. Now, we at Define American, we ask journalists to do three things. Please know your sources, right? Because the reality is a lot of people going to work for the Trump administration have histories with those three groups I just cited. We ask journalists to ask people directly impacted by the issue. Not only what they think, but what their experiences are. We ask them to consider their words. Journalistic language should be descriptive and accurate, not inflammatory and dehumanizing. Come to think of it, I find it really interesting that in this country, when people of color move, we call them migrants or immigrants. When white people move, we call them expats. What is that about? Now, as consumers, as news consumers, we ask you to do three things. Please know your sources. So when the Center for Immigration Studies get quoted, you're gonna go, wait a second, where did that come from? Second, know your history. When I was making White People, I was filming in the University of Georgia in Athens, which I didn't know was a conservative place. I got invited by the college Republicans, so I showed up. And you know how people of color always get asked where we're from? Like, where are you from? So I've gotten into the habit of asking white people where they're from. You know, payback time. Just kidding. So I started asking this young man, hey, where are you from? And he goes, What do you mean, I'm American? No, where are you from? I'm white, he said. Well, white is not a country. Where are you from? He didn't know. I'm like, how can you not know? How can you obsess over borders and walls that you don't even understand? So I find it so fascinating that people say, right, as you noted, that people say that we should earn our citizenship while never really fully examining how they got to be citizens in the first place. If you're a US citizen, can you raise your hand? How'd you get it? What was that? Oh, the accident of birth. Congratulations, isn't that great? Is that it? Is that how the country got to be so quote unquote great? What are we all fighting for together? Now, these to me are really deep questions. And I would argue that some of this, I don't think we have the language for quite yet. When I was writing my book, the hardest thing to really write about was them. You know, Sunday is Mother's Day, which is like my least favorite thing. That's my grandmother, that's my mom. So my grandmother moved here in 1984, became a naturalized US citizen in 1994. My grandmother has seen her daughter, my mom, I think 6 times since then. Because I've actually offered multiple times for hey, Lola, grandmother in Tagalog, just go to the Philippines, I'll pay for it. And somehow my grandmother, you know, she has a hard time going to the Philippines. You know what she has an easier time doing? Going to Macy's and buying my mom tons of makeup. Right? It's almost as if we don't know how to say, we don't know the language of loss and separation, that we would rather just buy stuff. You know? That's my mom. So I haven't seen her since she put me on a plane when I was 12. So that's 26 years this August. I can't leave. If I leave, there's no guarantee they'd let me back in. I don't want to use the word stuck, but that's kind of what I'm dealing with. My mom has been waiting 16 years to come here in a tourist visa. I mean, she come here legally. She has 2 more years to left. She can't come on a tourist visa, by the way, because she's not a college graduate and she doesn't own property. So what does that tell you about class and race and that how it plays into a role in all of this? I can't really describe the loss of 26 years. So it's easier for me to just buy my mom iPhone stuff. It's easier to just support her every month. I send an allowance like a lot of immigrants do. It's easier to just, you know, hide behind all that. When I was writing the book, there was no hiding from it. So actually, I don't know if you've read the book, some of you have read it. The book ends with her. I thought it made sense that she was the last person you hear from because my life doesn't make sense without her and without the choice she made. Lastly, this was actually one of the hardest things to write in the book was this dedication page thing. So clearly my mom, and to every American who has ever welcomed me in this country that had never needed papers and laws to treat me like I was a human being. But then I started thinking about the work. What is the work? The work is that the reality is there's 258 million migrants in the world. That is the largest movement of people the world has ever seen. If you add the consequences of climate change, I don't even know to what that number would balloon to. If you add the fact that we keep bombing people and having wars and what impact that has in refugee policies, I think the work of my life, wherever I am, is gonna be, how do you create a more inclusive, more humane language around people's right to move? That Toni Morrison quote, I love that quote. We die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. Thank you for having me here. Do I go there? Come. I think we're having a Q&A here. So. Sorry, the light stuff. What's up?
How are you?
I'm all right.
How you
I'm a
feeling?
little. Sorry, the light.
So, you said that your English teacher got you into journalism because you asked a lot of questions. How much control, or would you say influence, did you have over the media portrayal of undocumented immigrants at the various publications that you worked?
Nothing. I feel really guilty about that, actually, because I spent like 13 years of my career in newsrooms running away from immigration stories. Like whenever there was an immigration story, I made sure that I wasn't anywhere near the vicinity where anybody could assign the story to me. Because I was afraid the moment I read about it, I was gonna get found out. And mind you, my name is Jose Antonio Vargas. I think I was the only Jose who's a reporter in DC when I lived there for like 5 years, in all of DC. I'm really sad to say this, by the way. There are actually less journalists of color now in newsrooms than when I started in journalism in 1998. Like, diversity is a really big issue. I can't even think of a single, hold on a second. I can't think of a single Latina or Latino in charge of a major newsroom that's not Telemundo or Univision. What, 56 million Latinx people in this country? Yeah, I can't think of one. Like, too often in newsrooms, whenever this issue comes up, what happens is the journalists of color are seen as having a bias. And so editors are less willing to assign them the stories. So when you're a person of color, you have a bias. I like to say this, David Brooks is an interesting guy, but when David Brooks says something, it's an analysis. When I say it, it's an agenda, right? So those are two kind of very different kind of prism.
Okay. So in Define American, your organization, you mentioned that you like to uplift different stories. So to that, I want to know, what do you think of your relationship with different organizations in the movement, such as Undocu Black Network, NACASAC, United We Dream, and how do you uplift the work that other organizers are doing on the ground?
Because we are not organizers, that's not what we do. There's people doing that work. So we have partners. Like, for example, when the rapper 21 Savage got detained in Georgia? So we work with a consortium of partners, including Undocu Black, including United We Dream, to make sure that we place undocumented Black immigrants at the center of that campaign, and that we help them kind of in many ways get into other mainstream outlets that otherwise they wouldn't get into. So it really depends. Like, I wish, for example, that we do more work with undocumented Asian groups. It's really hard to do that. Like, we have chapters across the country, so we have like Define American chapters, and one of them is at Harvard. And the guy who founded it has now become the first undocumented Rhodes Scholar. He's Korean, right? 1 out of 7 Koreans is undocumented. We have a really hard time engaging the Korean press because they'd rather keep silent about it. Like, they don't really want to necessarily keep talking about the fact that there are undocumented Koreans in the country. So for me, the challenging actually thing is to work outside of traditional immigrant groups. So one of the events I was really proud about at Define American, so we hosted the first ever convening of Native American tribal leaders and undocumented leaders at the Kennedy Center for 2 days, 2 years ago now. And the title of the convening was Land and Citizenship. I wish we did a better job engaging working class Black and white Americans. So we're trying to figure out how to effectively do that. The executive director of the organization actually is in Louisville, Kentucky, who's a Baptist minister who grew up in Appalachia. And I remember when we hired him, some people said to me, "What are you doing hiring a Southern white guy to run in your organization? He should have been Latin." I'm like, well, I hire Latin people too, and Black people, and we need everybody, right? Like, I'm a firm, like, that's why we're called Define American. We didn't say Define Immigrant. I feel really strongly that intersectionality sounds sexy when you talk about it, but putting it into work is really hard. And I'm committed to actually putting that into work.
Awesome sauce. I think it's really important to acknowledge that immigrants don't look just like one idea of what we all may think. With that being said, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions?
Please, somebody ask me a question, or else you're going to make me nervous. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, there's a mic, man.
Hello. Hi, Diana. So first of all, just thank you for coming. And I watched your documentary in 2012. I'm a
that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm an undocumented student, person from Africa, from Kenya. I was born there. Came when I was 3. And that documentary, in a lot of ways, changed my life because it gave me the freedom to be able to share the fact that I was undocumented to a lot of people. So just thank you for that.
Oh, thanks, man.
My question is, how do you deal with the death and loss of, or just the loss of the time with your parents, and just the distance? How do you deal with those feelings? Like, do you have a counselor, or like, how do you deal with those, those emotions that you probably have to bury? Like, how do you deal with that?
Okay, wait, don't go anywhere. How do you deal with it? See, I'm sorry, I'm a journalist. I can't help it.
It's fine. Probably just bury it.
What's that?
Just bury it and like just deal with it because I have other stuff to do.
Isn't it amazing how much we distract ourselves from kind of the central things? So I've always known that I was depressed. And then I saw a doctor who said that I'm just a productive, depressed person. Like, meaning I deal with the depression by doing as many things as I possibly can. So when I wrote the book, one of the things I had to do was not to do anything else but write the book. I wasn't doing pre-production for a film. I wasn't raising money for that. I did one thing for 7 months, write the book, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. Because then I had to deal with everything that I had to, what did you say? Just bury.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you though, I never had therapy before because, I grew up watching Frasier. And I thought Frasier screwed up and he's a therapist. So like, what's the point of seeing a therapist? I just never saw one. And so the book is probably the closest to therapy I ever got. It's probably the biggest gift I'd given myself, was to actually just put on the page how I feel and not run away from it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that for me has been the biggest therapy. The other thing is to be kind to myself. Like, I've stopped feeling guilty. Which is maybe the Catholic in me, to feel really guilty that sometimes when the trolls or the anti-immigrant people get really nasty, you know what they do? They send me an email saying, "You're an ungrateful son, why don't you go see your mom?" Like, why don't you want to go see your mom? But that would require leaving, right? So I've learned to accept the fact that nothing will ever replace the past 26 years. And all I can do, especially after writing this book, is admit to that loss and own up to it and now make it better. So for example, now I'm doing a better job communicating with my mom beyond sending her money. I actually asked, "How are you doing? What was your day like? What are you gonna give my sister for her birthday?" So that's how I deal with it.
Okay.
Yeah. We should, by the way, FYI, in the fall, I'm going to start this whole thing on just mental health. And you'll hear about it. But I just feel really strongly that aside from legal services, I think mental health services is something that all immigrants, documented and undocumented, really need to grapple with. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. No, please. Hi.
Hi, I'm Shantae Robinson, assistant professor at School of Social Service Administration. And I love that you bring in Toni Morrison, and I would like to bring in Audre Lorde.
Yes.
That the master's house will never the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Yeah.
So in your work, when you're talking about redefining or rewriting or reframing the master narrative, in your opinion, can we do that using the master's pens?
Using what was the last part?
The master's pens.
Pens?
Yeah, pens, pencils.
So I struggle with that because to try to figure out how do we dismantle it while we create something new? Because that's the thing, right? We have to work towards something new. What's really tough for me now is because it's like every day there's an onslaught of everything. And I feel like everyone has gotten this very dystopian view of what's happening, that we're not really imagining what we're not offering a vision. So what does that vision look like? So for us, so I mentioned all of our consulting TV work, right? A lot of that is happening because most writers' rooms are white, right? Like newsrooms, right? There's not a difference really. Actually, wait a second. Which is worse? I don't know. Probably both. I don't know which one is worse. But so part of that for us is how do we then make sure that we're uplifting, you know, people of color in writers' rooms? How do we actually provide more opportunities? I'm really, really proud of this. Last week, Define American, we launched our first undocumented artist fellowship. Artists from multiple disciplines, fine art, performing art, and provided them for 6 months a structure in which to operate from. Why? Because so many scholarships and fellowships have eligibility requirements that don't allow undocumented immigrants to apply. So we also started a campaign called Scholarships for All, basically challenging every fellowship and scholarship to re-examine their eligibility requirements. We're gonna have some interesting announcements in the next few weeks about that. Meaning, if the Rhodes Scholarship allowed an undocumented immigrant to get a Rhodes Scholarship, even though they said you have to be a U.S. citizen. If the Rhodes Scholarship can change its requirements, so can the Kiwanis Club in Iowa, right? So can the Writing Fellowship in Wisconsin. So that's what we're gonna push toward. So for us, it's both, how do we push back on the Atlantic and how do we create new Atlantics? I think we have to do both. I wish that we didn't have to do so much of the former, but unfortunately right now we do. Thank you. Yes. What's up? You've been taking notes, so I'm a little bit scared of what you're
no,
gonna
I
ask.
always take notes.
Okay, good.
It's just to
Okay, cool.
keep everything in there. So I guess kind of a comment going off of the social emotional aspect
Yeah.
of it. Being someone that was undocumented for 20 years, and now I've been able to get citizenship only through marriage. We're in love, but through marriage.
You don't have to say you're in, well,
Because
great.
it's part of
Congratulations,
the,
awesome.
It's part, do you know what I'm saying? I've been married for 10 years now, but it's part of, I guess, the whole dealing with the emotional aspect of things. So I think just a comment in regards to, it's wonderful to hear that you're gonna be touching on mental support, because as living through it, it's difficult. So high school was difficult, finding out was difficult, not being able to get the license was difficult, not being able to go to Paris because you couldn't for the French class was, very difficult as well, amongst many other milestones that we are unable to have. So I guess your book, in my opinion, as an educator, as a teacher for elementary students, that some of them are newcomers, some of them are citizens of the United States, but do come from mixed families. I think the best therapy for us that are going through it is your book. As I was reading it, I was seeing, kind of relating to, again, those milestones, 2006, the march. It took me back. It took me back to marching, in white, walking with my family, with my nephew, then to 2012, remembering how Navy Pier was packed, remembering how we were listening on the radio and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, people were already lining up. And being a part of that, because by then I already had, my status. So I guess a question for me that, for you that I have is, how do you deal with, you touched upon it a little bit, I think, in the book, the feeling of privilege. So I compare myself to fellow undocumented colleagues, friends that I still have in my family as friends, et cetera. And I think, again, going back to that sharing of stories, I believe will be like a big step forward for me. Through Jorge Ramos's Real America, I took a baby step and shared, and then when the back and forth of emailing and saying, so tell us more about your story, so tell us this, I said, do me a favor, don't use my married name. Use my maiden name, because there's still people in my family that this could come back and attach. So how do you deal with that feeling of privilege?
The first thing I want to say is that we need more books like this, meaning books that are not about the policy and the politics of immigration, but the psychology of it. So thankfully the book is doing well enough that more publishers would want to publish books like this, because I was told in the beginning, people don't want to read immigration books. I was like, oh, okay. But now we have to create more, so we hear from undocumented Black immigrants, we hear from women. I think, I have a friend in LA who was commenting on the fact that so many women don't report domestic abuse anymore because they're afraid that if they report it, it may come back to bite them in terms of immigration enforcement. So there's so many more stories that we need, right? One is never enough. That's the first thing. Your second point. Handling the privilege part of this for me is probably one of the top 3 tough things for me to deal with. I can deal with the people who I did this event in Mississippi and somebody called ICE on the event, which I thought was hilarious. I'm like, okay, sure. You think I'm afraid of you? Like, really? Like, no, I'm good. So I'm actually less afraid of that. And for me, what's been more hurtful is dealing with people in the immigrant rights community who I am never enough for. I'm not gay enough, apparently. I'm pretty gay to me, but okay, sure. Because apparently I don't talk enough about being gay. I don't talk enough about, my socioeconomic status, that I come from family that was not making. There's all these expectations that I'm supposed to be instead of just what I am. And I wrote it in the book, like when I got arrested in Texas, it was only 8 hours I was detained, and then I got released. And then I saw all the messages, right? Because, on Facebook, they tag you, right? And, some of the young dreamers that I was actually mentoring that asked me for money and that I've given money to would actually say just really kind of hurtful things. So that really messed with me for like a good year or so. And then I started realizing this was catharsis, was that hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
Like we're all swimming in like so much hurt and pain that we're just kind of flinging it at each other. Like I'm never gonna be enough. So I have to be enough for me. I have to own up to whatever privilege I have, right? The thing for me that was hard to deal with was like, I remember all those years that I was in the New York, that I was at the Washington Post, I was at the New Yorker, in places that didn't have people of color. And I remember the tests that I had to pass so that these Ivy League educated white people would think that I was good enough. And then suddenly I come out, all of a sudden I wasn't good enough for the immigrant rights people either. So that was really disorienting. But then I just had to, what did Baldwin say, right? You have to force the world to deal with you, not its idea of you. So for a while, that was like a little prayer I said to myself every day. So all you gotta do is own up to it, because the most important thing is that you know who you are. That is the most important thing.
Thank you.
Thanks. What's up?
So my question would be, I don't get your point. What would you do to handle illegal immigration? Like, are you for open borders?
Am I for what?
Open borders.
Okay, so can you define open borders?
Everyone can come in and get out. Like, that means no passport check at the airport.
I believe that a country has a right to know who's here. Like, I don't even know how all those years that I was at the Washington Post, I was able to go to the White House with a fraudulent Social Security number. I remember once I got assigned to cover a White House state dinner for the Japanese Prime Minister, and you had to go through security, and I was like, they're gonna find out. So if we really care about security, we have to know who's here, right? And I think if we're gonna solve it, we have to really face who's here. That's the first thing. I think for me, before passing any sort of reform, because I don't even know what immigration reform would look like, I think we have to know what we're dealing with and who we're dealing with. That's the first thing. The second thing is understanding how do we create policies that respect our own history while trying to figure out what's fair for people. Like I would argue, for example, that it's completely unfair, right, that we keep people in this kind of state of purgatory. Right? So one example, only 12 states allow us to drive, Illinois being one of them, right? If I'm in California where I'm allowed to drive, my license from the state of California is not valid in the state of Illinois. Does that make any sense? No. So what is that about? Lastly, before I can hear that you want to have a follow-up, open borders. And I've been thinking a lot about this because my next book is probably going to be about the global implications of this. I find it so interesting that my iPhone can travel to more places than I can as a human being, right? It can be manufactured in China, delivered to Cupertino, headquarters of Apple, end up in New York where I buy it. Why is it that technology and gadgets are borderless, and yet people who are trying to work are not? Like, what is that about? Open borders, kind of David Frum's cover story, right? Like, how much immigration is too much? It assumes that most people would move given the choice. I would actually argue the opposite. I would argue that most people would stay in their countries if they could stay. So how can we do that? How can we, for example, provide whatever we can provide to countries so that they don't have to come to this country just so they can make a living? So that to me is the conversation. Or you have a follow-up question?
No, that was about like.
Oh, okay.
Why do you think a rich country would have to develop poor country?
Oh, can you say that again? Why? What?
Why do you think a rich country would have to give money to poor country?
Because how did the country get rich?
Imperialism.
What was that?
Colonialism, imperialism, like empires.
Well, let me give you an example. So when I was arrested in Texas, I was detained with little boys. So it was really hard to look at them. So all I could do was look at their shoes. And you know what their shoes were? Adidas, Nike, and Reebok. So meaning the globalization of products, right? Companies, corporations, right? Have taken advantage of globalization to make money off industries and people. So I think trying to understand how we, you know, the number that I brought up, 258 million migrants. So what rights do those people have under a globalized economy to make a living? Yeah. That is a big question for me. I don't think it should be a question of rich or poor. I think it should be a question of what is a fair way for people to make a living?
Yeah, but like, for example, so I come from a socialist country, I come from France. And so why would my parents have to pay taxes that go to our government, that French government gives to poor country to develop themselves, instead of going in social security or things like that, that my parents can benefit from?
Benefit from what? I'm sorry, benefit from?
So why my parents should pay taxes that benefits other countries instead of the French citizens?
And what are these other countries?
I know, we give money to former colonies.
Well, to me, a lot of that too is the history of Europe, right? Like I find it so interesting that it was certainly open borders for the French, you know, for the British Empire and for the Spanish Empire and for all these countries to take over the rest of the world so they can build their industries, right? So if that was okay then why is it not okay now for people?
Because the world changed, like things were okay before, things are not okay now.
Yeah, but I would argue though that a thing, you know how some people say that we're living through like a global migration crisis?
Yeah.
I actually don't think so. I think we are living through the natural progression of history. Meaning if you can, if French people can go to Algeria, right? Why can't Algerians go to France?
We can go to Algeria without a passport.
What was that?
You can go to Algeria without a passport.
No, meaning the history in terms of who colonized whom and who imperialized what country. We can have, if there are any other questions, I'll give you my card and we can keep having a conversation if you want.
Okay.
But thank you. Any other questions? How much time do we have left? What do you think? 5? Okay, great. Go ahead. Hi.
Hi, my question is about engaging invisible immigrants and what you've learned about that. So I guess I'll give a little bit of history about myself. I came here documented, but like you shared, I live in a family that is mixed in terms.
What was that?
I live in a family that is mixed in terms of documentation, and as like deportations have increased, it feels like things aren't being discussed in the Caribbean community, in the African community, until they start hitting home, right? And so I think I read somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 immigrants, African and Caribbean, have already been deported and or detained. And
that's probably an undercount too, by the way. I think that's an undercount, yeah.
And it's not being discussed
No.
in any of these communities, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
So my question is, I understand why people are quiet about it, because there's a huge amount of shame, but I am curious about what lessons you've learned in terms of trying to engage invisible immigrants.
So let me just say this, because having come out of 2 closets, and I have no more to share with people closet-wise, I've learned that you can't really push people, right? Like when they're ready, they're gonna be ready. Like I remember we heard from this guy, oh my God, Bamba John Bamba, who's an actor who was in the Black Panther movie. And I guess he had been researching immigration groups, and then he contacted us 2 months before Black Panther was gonna come out and said, I'm undocumented, I'm in the Black Panther movie, help me. So we actually build this entire camp. We work with UndocuBlack. We build this entire campaign to have a conversation about being an undocumented Black actor in Hollywood. And the silence that greeted us was pretty deafening, right? Like, they want to talk about, that wasn't part of how Hollywood wants to see Black people, especially white Hollywood. It was so interesting. So, but the only thing we could do was to try to make sure that Bamba John was happy with how we were presenting the campaign with him, right? But then, even if we have to do private events so people can feel safer, we did that.
Okay.
Right? So there's that. So meeting people where they're at is kind of important, because what I don't want to do, having come out of 2 closets, is add to the trauma. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to make it feel like I'm forcing people to come out before they're ready.
Okay.
So, and that's why I think this thing that we're about to do, this mental health thing that we're about to do, I think in the fall is going to be really, hopefully, helpful, because it doesn't need to be like a public thing, which I think is important even now, you know, like that people can feel like they can get help without other people knowing it, right? And without kind of the stigma of being public.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. My name is Gabriela, and I crossed my path with you in the same day that you wrote that article about being an undocumented. I'm undocumented too, and I came to this country 14 years ago with my daughter. She's a DACA now.
Oh, good.
And I just want to say thank you, because you bring on the table the mental health issue. My daughter struggles every single day with this, stressful to be deported, because this administration finished the DACA program, and she has 2 more years to stay legally in this country. But thank you so much for bringing on the table the mental issue stuff. Is so important. I deal every single day with this situation, and I really feel very connected with you and all the DACA people who has the same issue.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. You know, part of the reason why we're bringing it up is because we think it may be the most accessible way for people to understand this in human terms, not in policy acronym terms, not in conservative liberal terms, but again, in like experience. Like, what are people experiencing? So that's why. I think you had a question? Yeah. What's up?
I enjoy hearing my own voice.
I know, neither do I, and I've been talking for like an hour. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for coming and for everyone's amazing questions. And I think you've answered them so beautifully and really kind of taken the... See, my mind is
it's okay.
not racing. But my question was a lot about kind of mental health and privilege. I moved to the United States in 2005. My parents were Rwandan. They left in 1994 because of the genocide. We are undocumented, living in Zambia until we moved in 2005. I was born in 1996 in Tanzania. And I'm now a naturalized citizen of the United States. And I guess my question had to do with, in 2018, Rwanda invited all refugees and immigrants back to their country, losing the status of refugees. So we came to the United States through the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And so everyone in my family is a citizen except for my dad, who has a permanent residency in the United States, and he can't get his citizenship because he knows everything about America, but he can't write or read. And so in our language, he can tell you everything about every president that has been in the office. And so my question is, what does that look like in other countries? The invitation back to live where they once lived, where they never wanted to leave. And is that a question that you've thought of before?
I'm grappling with that with the next project, because the other question that I'm bringing up is this idea of what constitutes citizenship. Like, there's that tennis player, Naomi Osaka. I guess when she turns 22 pretty soon, she has to make a decision which citizenship to have. Like, she can't be a Japanese citizen and an American citizen. She has to pick one. What? Like, what does that even look like? And so how does Japan, how does France, how does the UK, how do they determine US citizenship? And again, this makes America really unique, right? Because we say in this country, you come to America, you become American, whatever that may be, right? Like, that's why it's not a surprise, by the way, that President Trump is using birthright citizenship as a big issue. I bet you that is what he's gonna he's gonna be the centerpiece of his campaign to get reelected for president, is getting rid of birthright citizenship. Because I think for many people, you know, like the graphic that I showed, there's just too many immigrants. So to that point, how many people would want to come back? So I've done very minimal research on this, but I know from the Philippines, so there's 10 million Filipinos overseas. The diaspora is 10 million people. And apparently, they only come back through the money and the goods that they give the Philippines. That they'd rather stay in wherever they are than come back to the Philippines. So some Philippine institutions are studying, why don't they want to come back? What's wrong with our country? So that's kind of in a preliminary stage. So I'm interested in that, India and China. So I'm looking at those 3 countries. You know, I have not looked, because I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't gotten to Africa and South America and Central America. So I'm about to get into that. So I'm probably working on that next year.
All right.
That's a great question, though.
Thank you.
That's a hard topic to kind of puncture. Thank you. Any other questions before we go? I think there's food. Yes, what's up? Yeah. I know, I've been watching you, and I'm like, am I making sense to this kid? I hope so.
Yeah. My mother was just...
Oh, that's your mom.
Yeah.
What's your name?
My name is Caesar.
What's up,
12,
Caesar?
and I'm a very lucky guy. I was born here, so that makes me a legal U.S. citizen. And my question was, well, it's not really that big of a question, but can you remember your childhood back in the Philippines? Was it a good childhood? That's my question. Really big one.
And your mom is very lucky to have you.
Yeah.
You know, I don't. When I was writing the book, it was really hard to remember. I remembered my first memory because my mom and I shared a bed. The apartment was so small that we had one bed. So I remember that the first person I saw when I was conscious enough to know what it means to like be a human being is that my mom was next to me. And when I was writing the book, I was trying to remember her. You know, when I left, did you say you're 12?
Yeah, I'm 12.
So I was 12 when I left, right? So when I left that morning, she woke me up. She said the suitcase was packed. There was a car waiting outside. There was no time to brush my teeth or to take a shower. We got to the cab. I got to the airport. She gave me a jacket. She said it might be cold there. Because I guess we saw Home Alone, the movie. Have you seen Home Alone? Yeah. So it's like, you know, Home Alone, right? So my mom thought it was gonna be cold. So she gave me the jacket, and that was it. Like, I don't remember if I said I love you. I don't remember if I said I'll miss you. I don't remember if I said thank you. Now, when I was writing the book, like, I can't make that up. You know, I was like, do I just say that? No, I can't, because it's not true. So it really hurts me that I can't remember it. A friend of mine who's a psychiatrist was saying that you were so traumatized, Jose, that you just maybe can't remember it. And maybe when you get even older, because, you know, I'm 38 and, you know, that's kind of old, but not really. Maybe I'll remember more. And I'm saying all of this because remember everything. Okay? Like, try to remember everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks. You so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your lovely questions and for coming out. And thank you